And maybe my biggest productivity hack, and I started doing it maybe 4 years ago, color coding your calendar. It sounds simple, but it really made a difference for me. Like, you could literally see by color what's your focus for the day, what's your focus for the week, and also what your focus for like the entire year, if necessary, right? So if I was hiring an executive and my calendar did not have enough purple, which in my case is the color for kind of like interviews and hiring, then clearly my time is misaligned with my priorities.
Welcome to Tools for Tech Leaders, a podcast for C-suite executives and tech decision makers who are excited to connect with peers and thought leaders sharing ideas, frameworks, and tools that resonate and are useful to them. I'm your host, Ian Tien, CEO and co-founder of Mattermost, and today we're thrilled to be joined by Meirav Oren, co-founder and chairwoman of Versatile. So Meirav specializes in construction tech, done well, utilizing non-invasive approaches to data collection from construction sites, using hard data to make easy decisions. So Meirav, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, and you know, we met we met in Europe at a conference, and it was so great to learn about your story. And thank you so much for coming on. And it was such a super interesting story. I'd love to hear, just to kind of share, how did this? You're building an amazing business. How did it start, and what was your journey like?
Sure, happy to share. So this is the classic how can I disappoint my parents story, if you'd like. So my father was a general contractor, yet instead of becoming a superintendent, I ended up at Intel, which he didn't necessarily like, but my mom was quite happy with that. So when I ended up bootstrapping kind of like a hardware-enabled SaaS service for construction, my mom was like besides herself, like, will Intel take you back? You're unemployed. What's going on? So apparently just not pleasing your parents is a good place to start. But if we kind of like put kidding aside a little bit, this journey really started because my brother did follow my dad's footstep into construction. And a couple of years ago, he lost a worker on his job site. And that not only changed what I used to call the dynamics of construction debate Friday night dinners, it really made us think and wonder, why is it that construction, though very similar to manufacturing, granted, fragmented and non-structured process, but still, why is it that there's no control over the process? And that night, a crazy idea came to be. We pretty much asked, what if we could get data out of job sites, interpret it, and put it back in the hands of the actual boots on the ground as sheer power. They can make better decisions, they could be safer, they could meet their timelines, they will actually know how long things take. And just a point about that, because I think that's the essence of Versatile, those measurements. You can't even begin to improve something that you don't measure. So those measurements are absolute key to everything that we do.
How would you sort of describe it to someone who's maybe not from that construction space when you think about, like, what is the actual sort of sensor and device that's put out there?
Happy to explain. So here's the simple version of what Versatile really is, or what this data capture out of a job site really looks like. We zoned in on the crane, because if you kind of like take a step back and understand construction a little bit, the crane is a pivotal tool. It's a pacemaker. It really is also, to my view, a great storyteller if you just listen to the story. So we built a device that goes under the hook of the crane, and I'm happy to share a picture. That device has multi-sensors, so not just a camera, if you like, but a load cell and a GPS and an accelerometer, and pretty much anything you can think of on your smartphone. That device captures all this data that allows us to say not just what the crane is doing or whether it's moving or not, but what is the load, what process the load is involved in, and how long things really take. And this is where the magic really begins, because if you know all that, you know, for the first time, by the way, what are the actual production rates of a job site in steel itself, whether a Christmas tree, which is when you put more than one steel beam together with others and actually tie them together, does that even make sense? And is it really a productivity gain? In concrete is jumping forward, which means you do the kind of like the stripping and the installation in one go. Does that even make sense? Versatile actually measures all of that, and it can actually give you answers for that. Not only that, but when we see our customers deviate, so we now know that it takes 6 minutes to install that specific element, and yesterday it took you 45 minutes. We will tell you the next morning, and we will show you everything that we know about that specific lift, so you can do something about it in real time. And that's where the magic really begins.
That's amazing. So if you can kind of share, like, what's the before and the after? Like, what are some job sites? Like, what did it look like before and after Versatile?
So I love kind of like quoting our customers on that. And this is where they say like, I'm so knowledgeable, especially superintendents. So this is like the hidden power in their back pocket where they come into a conversation and they actually know what happened. It cuts kind of like conversations down to the 5 minutes where it takes to make a decision rather than argue over who's actually, responsible or what happened. You know exactly what happened. In most cases, what we're seeing is productivity gains that can come up to weeks. In extreme cases, even months. Like we've seen some really impressive core and shell progress done right because they understood how they can control one of their most valuable assets and how that influences the entire job site. So we've seen, I think there's a published case study for 5 weeks productivity gains just on that ability to control your resources. And again, if you think of the crane as a storyteller, then you could schedule your deliveries as a result. You can actually understand how long each one of your trades really need this very expensive, very pacemaking tool that you have in the heart of your job site. So we're seeing a ton of productivity gains. Another thing that I love seeing is 0 incidents. So if construction sites might have incidents under the hook, they seem to disappear when we show up because the process is monitored. And it's not the camera. There's so many cameras on job sites. So I can't just say this is, oh, well, we put a camera up there. It's because people understand that the process itself is understood. And they give kind of like the extra second when they rig or the extra second when they unrig, and they keep themselves safe. And that's one of the things I really, really love. And maybe the best story, we sometimes save jobs. So we had a case of where there was an incident on a job site, and the immediate conclusion was that that employee did something wrong, and he was tending to lose his job. The versatile data actually showed that he followed procedure, and the problem was indeed the process. And that's the magic of what we did, or what we do. As a result, that employee obviously got to keep his job, and the process was changed to keep everyone safe. So that's one of my favorite stories. There's many others, but I always go back to that story because it's so precious when you can do that.
That's awesome. I think it's amazing what you can do with data. I think about the early days of any sort of technology, the process. If you can monitor it, and if you can measure it, then you can actually actuate it. And seems like quite a breakthrough and super exciting. When you think about how you got there and you started this, you talked about like the safety of Intel and going to something that is very entrepreneurial and a lot of risk and a lot of ambiguity. What do you think was you had in yourself in terms of that acceptance of risk and ambiguity? Even when your parents are saying, hey, don't do it, like what was it within you that's maybe different from other people who didn't start and could have started?
I think it's really a DNA because I see it in other founders. To me, this was being able to say to handle no, right? Being very confident in my way. You have to be in love with your idea. I keep telling this to entrepreneurs when we have those conversations. If you don't believe in what you're doing, then don't expect anyone else to. You'll get all the no's in the world and that will bring you down. But if you truly believe, then I think your demeanor pretty much sends a message to the world that says, I'm going to do it no matter what. It's not a question of whether you join me or not. I'm on this path and I'm offering, a seat in that kind of like rocket ship. You don't have to take it though, right? And I think that's the thing that makes the whole thing actually work in terms of the journey. I'll say one other thing. I found great people that gave me incredible advice and really wanted to help. I tapped into ecosystems that I believed could help me. And I was diligent in how I sought out help. And I think that makes a lot of difference because people want to help you. And sometimes you don't know how to accept help or how to ask for it. I've always done the research. I've always made sure that I know what it is that I actually need from that person that I speak to. So when I come into a conversation, I know what I can give and I know what I really need. And magic just happens. I started knowing absolutely no one. My dad was indeed a GC, but I grew up in Israel, and that's where he was a general contractor. So I had no contacts in what I knew was my target market from day one. So I built it through joining programs like Mass Challenge. They did not take equity. They had a program in Jerusalem at the time, and that actually allowed me to tap into an amazing network. I did the research to understand who the mentors are, and I think I brought wherever I go, I hopefully still bring that spirit today. The whole go-getter, like this is going to happen because I believe in this. I believe in the industry. I believe in what needs to happen. I believe in the solution to a problem that needs to be solved. I believe in empowering those boots on the ground so they can be safer, so they can manage their budget and their timeline and go home safely to their kids. Like we underestimate how important it is to actually make it home for dinner. But guess what? It is important, and do that without risking your business goals. And I think that's what makes us so unique, that true belief. And that's probably what makes me unique, because I've heard more no's probably at the beginning than anyone else. We bootstrapped for 18 months, and I truly believe it's part of the magic. Find a path, like know where you're going, and just go there. And don't depend on others. Like listen to advice, kind of like pick up the mentors that you need. But I don't think I ever let anyone think for me. And that I say that to my team sometimes. Like you're the only thinker in your head. And if you take a step back and kind of like take that statement in, so often we let others think for us. We let others tell us what's right or what's wrong. I truly believe that good entrepreneurship starts with believing in your ideas and being able to think for yourself. It means when you take advice, you kind of like compute it, and then you find your path. You don't just do what you're told. So there's a lot of magic in that.
Yeah, absolutely. And then it sounds like, you want people to think for themselves. You're the only thinker in your head. How do you create that? When you're with 6 people and bootstrapping, it's very different than when you're with 100 people and they're like, well, that's the CEO. So how do you get people to think for themselves when you're the CEO and you're having conversation back and forth and this person's like, wow, everything sounds so good. How do you get the people to think for themselves and actually tell you no, or actually point out things that you might be missing?
I think that's a huge challenge, and it's even a bigger challenge when you have a big personality. And I was sometimes told that, I walk in and I suck the air out of the room, right? And it's a good thing as an entrepreneur, but it could be a challenge as a leader. And I've been kind of like dealing with that for sure. I think I've done well in some cases and not as well on other cases. Our team is also dispersed. I think that makes it easier on one end and then even more challenging on the other end. I'm not sure I have all the answers. I do believe it's hiring and firing fast. I haven't always done that, but make sure that you surround yourself with people that you wholeheartedly believe in. When I was surrounded by people that, in my eyes, could do no wrong, it's very easy to take a step back and let them lead, even if you have strong personalities. But you have to trust the people around you. And when you don't, it becomes very apparent and it kind of like drive things the opposite direction. So I'll say transparency and trust, and being very aware of when you don't have that. Because if you're not aware, then don't count on other people to tell you that part. When you're dispersed, as we are, and this is something that I've learned from one of the executives at Versatile that I later appointed CEO, Ishai Smith, and he's radically transparent, which I love, especially in a dispersed environment. And that means all the documents are open. It means everyone could ask literally any question that they want to ask at any point. Slack could end up being very, very noisy as a result, but the trade-off would be people not knowing what's going on and not having the opportunity to maybe save the day if something does go wrong. So I'll say that's probably the best tool that I've picked up over time and not necessarily had at the beginning, but just being able to trust as much as literally opening everything up is a great tool for leaders.
Yep, excellent. So you can see different documents, different comments, different conversations happening, and just have everything default open.
Yeah, default open. Honestly, it reduces the time of meetings and amount of meetings that you need to have if conversations actually happen over documents. It's a hard change, by the way, from a cultural standpoint, but it's really a good one to make. So.
What are the things? So let's say an organization is making that switch from sort of default closed to default open. As you've gone through that journey, what are 1 or 2 things you might be like, okay, here's a tool, we can do it. What are 1 or 2 things that you might say, hey, just watch out for, and here's how you might address, something that might pop up as you make that change?
If you're ready to make that change from kind of like default closed to default open, just make sure that you have good definitions in place, as in what is out of the default. So you don't end up with, a very sensitive legal document that for good reasons should not have been opened, or personal information that obviously should be default closed. So just create the infrastructure that is very clear as to what remains default closed, just to avoid, mishaps from that perspective. And then just go for it. Just like open it up and have the conversation first and foremost with your leaders to say, this is what we're doing. It's a big change. We know not everyone will get used to it very fast, but literally just start and see how it feels and take it from there. But I will say, if you want to get people comfortable, start with defining what is still closed, just to and give people the opportunity to say why they think something should be closed. We've had many conversations, and in most cases, people actually realize that most documents should be open. But it did require giving people the space and the time to say, this is why I think it should be closed, and then having a conversation on why I, for example, believe it should be open.
Yep, makes a lot of sense. I'd love to go back to something we were talking about just a little earlier. So this is like one tool, sort of how do you keep things open and moving quickly and transparent. There's another thing you talked about, which is around advisors, and then how do you bring them in? And I think that, one thing I've noticed with my company is I'm trying to get more of our executives and even the middle managers to figure out how they can get advice from their peers out in the industry. Yeah. So peers as well as sort of mentors. And sometimes we try to triangulate and find someone who could be really helpful to one of our leaders, whether our current leaders or up and coming leaders. Have you thought about how to make that more systematic? It seems like you got a lot of help yourself, but have you been able to? How much do you think about bringing that out for the rest of your organization?
I think that's a great question, and also a challenge for every leader that I know. Accepting help yourself, and then obviously opening up that help to others. One of the ways that I found that was relatively useful is making a list of advisors available. Opening up tools that sometimes it's your investors that created them. One of our largest investors is Insight Partners, and they have their Go platform, which has so many tools, and I found myself using them. I think one of the best things I've done was to open it up to all the executive team. Like VP and above just gets access to tools like that. It doesn't have to be your investors, but just find that tool that really has a list of resources and a list of people that can help you. Another thing that I've done was just form a couple of close industry advisors. And yes, this is personal relationship. These are people that I've become kind of like very friendly with, and we have like a huge trust between us. But if they have trust with me, they have trust with my company, which makes it possible for me to say to, let's say, the VP of product, hey, you should really talk to this person. I think he could give you perspective over this, product roadmap or any specific feature that we're unsure about. Why not consult with this guy or someone else? So I found that to be helpful. And just personal coaching, especially for the up and coming. I'll quote other wise people on that one. I think one of my earlier investors said that he doesn't know why it is that professional athletes are never expected to get to the top without a coach and a trainer and possibly quite a few people on their staff helping them achieve that. Yet founders and CEOs and other executives are expected to figure it out on their own. So it's okay to ask for guidance. It's okay to have consultants, because you're not supposed to know it all.
I've totally been in the same place. Just being a CEO and yeah, you get the exec coach is so important. We actually have a few on the podcast that are to be coming on. But it's 100%. Like you have an athlete, they're expected to do well. They're expected to have a coach. And then you get advisors, and then you had an interesting one with your VP product, because we have advisors, and then sometimes we have. Do you ever have the issue where some execs are like, well, why are you talking to an advisor? Like, aren't I like? Is something wrong with me? How come I'm not like? Why do you need an advisor? Like, yeah. Do you get that? I get it from. I get mixed. Sometimes it's like, oh my god, I want an advisor. Like, yes, let's get someone who's like a few clicks ahead, or a peer I can bounce ideas off of. And some people are just like, why? Like, what like do you like? How's that shown up for you, if at all?
Oh, absolutely. I think it shows up in different dynamics, and you can't really avoid it. My way is like, if it's an up and coming and I really want someone to enhance their strength and maybe understand their weakness better, not just through, peer-to-peer feedback, but actually getting a coach. What I did at some point was just contract with kind of like a coaching company and get like a bunch of consultants on kind of like on call, if you'd like, and offer that program to those managers, not as like, I think you need help, but as a perk. Like, yeah, hey, we just started this program. There's an open slot for someone like you. Would you want to take it? And then if they say no, you get an opportunity to have a conversation, which otherwise may not have happened or would have been awkward if you just say you need a coach, right? It's just like, there's a program, there's a company program, and I think you qualify. This means I think the world of you, and I want to give you that opportunity, rather than I think your weakness far exceeds your strength. You need help, right? So it's about the way you present it. And honestly, it's normally us as leaders, we normally do that from that intent. You really do believe in that person's strength, and you believe that they can work on their weaknesses. So you're offering a gift. Well, just on your point on professional advisors, like, why do you need, like, why am I not enough? My comeback to that has normally been none of us holds all the truth, and the more perspective we can get, the better. This person's kind of like history and career trajectory has been so different than yours. I really believe that their perspective matters. It's not because I don't trust your opinion. It's because I seek more opinions before we make a decision on this. It sometimes works. Sometimes people are still uncomfortable, but it's the honest truth. So.
Yeah, 100%. And I think generally it's okay. It's just sometimes we get that question. I think once they meet the advisor, like, oh my gosh, usually it's very positive. It hasn't been, I can't think of things where it's a little bit more rocky after that maybe initial moment, which is maybe a theme on term. So maybe a theme on coaching is like, well, in athletics and all these things, you want to make people better. So in order to make people better, we really need is a clear-eyed sort of understanding of where everyone is. So, hey, we're doing this in November. It's performance management season, right? Like we do. I'm not sure when this podcast will go out, but like end of the year, you have end of year performance reviews. It's how do you do clear-eyed sort of understanding of where everyone is. And there's things that I was at Microsoft, you're at Intel. We're running companies that are going to be different from those cultures. What do you think are sort of the best, like what have you kind of learned in terms of tools, in terms of clarity of feedback and letting people know where they are, maybe for sort of like the executives and the middle and the key middle managers? Like how do you think about doing this and getting people sort of clear-eyed about where everything is and what the opportunities are?
Such a great question. I actually gave this some thought, and we've experimented with quite a few tools and platforms. And I also think that it changes so fast when you grow fast. And one of the things about Versatile is not only did it grow super fast, it was happening during COVID. So you couldn't get people together. You had to kind of like hire people that maybe you haven't met or know it all and find a way to work together. So again, like transparency definitely helps, but there are challenges to that may not be challenges that companies face today. So I'll not share every tool we ever used. Some were amazing, some were not so great. I will say that especially during that kind of like hyper growth, I just did more all hands. And at some point I did far less, probably not enough because you get so busy. But at that point, I remember at some point it was like literally weekly or bi-weekly, just to make sure everyone stays up to date and on the same page and go through challenges together. Other tools, I really think it's about your own journey and your own choice and what actually fits you, the size of your team. I like for feedback, for example, where it comes to kind of like the performance review. And you and I believe, had conversations about the organizations we come from and what we take from them and what we want to have different. And on this one, I believe it should be different than the big corps. This is where you can get personal. You can actually meet every one of the employees and deliver kind of like the feedback in a more personal way. We do actually do the kind of like 3 peers or even 5 peers sometimes, and a manager. And one of the things I did kind of like, I guess, like from Intel, is the self-reflection.
It sounds like you've got a performance management review process where self-reflection is really important, having sort of 3 to 5 peers and putting that package together. So kind of taking the best of Intel plus, what is specific to Versatile. And what have you sort of learned as you've iterated? Like, what are some of the aha moments? Like, we tried it. What are things that have changed and why?
I think things changed many times because of size and also kind of like leadership style of kind of like senior and mid-level management. But what we've tried anything from not having performance reviews. I was like, we're too small, it doesn't matter, like we're just kind of like, we're growing so fast, who cares? I would not recommend that even when you're small. I think people need to know where they stand. I find myself to be a better leader when I actually give feedback. And I try to give feedback, not obviously at the mid-year or yearly review, but still there's something about that pause that's really important for everyone around you, to really understand where they stand and where you stand. So as simple as I believe I am, as in like, tell me what you're going to do and then do it and we'll be just fine. There's more there. We then tried kind of like just manager to employee, informal kind of like, and we found that to be a bit biased. As in, if the employee and the manager don't necessarily get along, if they don't have that level of appreciation, it could lead people feeling unheard, which you really don't want. You want people to feel heard. What we do right now, I think, works. It's still in iterations. I don't think it's perfect, but there's 5 different reviews between your self-review, your manager's review, and kind of like peer review. And it's a whole process. Like, people really take the time to really think through this. I think writing about your peers is also very self-reflecting as you do that, right? Because if you give someone feedback, it gives you the opportunity to ask whether you're exhibiting the same behaviors that maybe you don't like in others. So I like just watching people go through that process. So forget the tools for a minute, because you could do this in any tool you would like, and some I like more, some I like less. Find a process that works for you, for your team, whether you're dispersed or in the same location, and get as many kind of like round perspectives as you can, and not just your own. Might be my best advice on that one. Don't just use your own perspective on any employee.
And then what's it like? Like, how many days do you have the self-reflection? Do you have a calibration where peers at the same level are done? Like how, because I think for us, it just kind of balloons. It's just sort of like, oh my God, it's such a long process. Can we kind of shrink it down? I think a lot of companies are kind of struggling with that. How do you deal with it?
Yeah, so definitely. And I think it is a long process, and it puts a lot of stress on anyone that manages people, right? So we start early. Yes, it's about a 2 month process. So it's definitely not a short process, but it's just to give people the time. It's not to have deadlines that like, okay, this just launched and it's due 2 days from now, but like you've got 3 weeks to get this done, or you've got another 10 days to figure that one out. And the meetings are pre-scheduled. So you have that flexibility within those as well. People will be people. So you kind of have to meet them where they are. And I think that's one of the things we do well in terms of even adjusting the process if necessary. If, I don't know, if someone, let's take a female employee that's expecting, you have to be more flexible. You have to find kind of like your ways of adjusting the process. And I think Versatile does that very well right now. Shout out to all the leadership and all the managers from kind of like first level all the way to CEO. It's done well. And again, I wouldn't give it perfection just yet.
Yep. So excellent. There's performance reviews. There's feedback. I'm just kind of curious. Outside of the form review process, sometimes we challenge folks, and sometimes things don't go always as planned. Sometimes you make a mistake that you kind of realize afterwards. How do you think about like small mistakes, big mistakes? Mm-hmm. How do you get feedback? How do you have a good system? How do you what do you do with culture where things aren't perfect all the time?
So I think I've said so very early in my journey. I've learned that I have to deal with mistakes, right? And perfectionism is not going to serve me very well. And I started literally telling myself that done is better than perfect. Done is better than perfect. I would struggle with an email that needs to go out and it's not there yet. And at some point I would just say done is better than perfect and hit send. And one of the things I've learned was my done sometimes is someone else's perfect. And I don't have to meet my own expectations all the time, because you just need to move, and like movement is better. Another thing, and this is again early mentor, probably the best. Someone asked me what was the best advice I ever got, and I give that one as that example. The world will slow you down, so you better be fast. And that goes to that done is better than perfect. If you hit that ball back as soon as you got it, then even if someone else is slow, you're not going to have the compounding effect of you taking a day and then they taking 3 days and you taking another 2 days. And especially in a multicultural, multi-locations, time zones environment, sometimes losing an hour is losing a week. So I think that's part of literally who I am in terms of get things done and get them done right now, to make sure that doesn't happen.
Yeah, that's excellent. Like, so are there examples of things, and this kind of goes to culture and values, where it's like done is better than perfect, which is like, hey, when the CEO is not in the room and the leadership team is meeting without you, what do they say? Like, well, at this point, the CEO would say this. Like, what are the things you think that your leadership team or your middle managers would be like, okay, they're not in the room, but they would ask this, they would ask us to think about this. What are some of the patterns that your team that have been imprinted, you think, in your culture?
Hopefully, one of the things that has been imprinted is the approach that says mistake counts toward tuition. So I used to quote, I think it was Nelson Mandela, that says, I never lose. I either win or I learn. So I kind of like took a spin on that and said, a mistake is tuition well paid, as long as we learned, obviously. So whenever there are mistakes, my question was always, what have we learned? Like, and let's make other mistakes, but not repeat that one again. So hopefully, whether in the room or even in the company or not, people will still ask, like, what have we learned? And are we in a position to not repeat that mistake again? Another thing that I think is really me is like, what's the customer's perspective on this? Rather than what's Versatile's perspective on this, what's the customer's perspective on this? And that's a really strong one when you think about it, because you have to have that mentality. You don't even exist without them, right? I'm super passionate about serving this industry and what we can actually do for our customers. And I think I did kind of like bring it into every conversation, and hopefully some of it rubs in. But most importantly, it's that tuition. Like, Because it really is. Whether you made a big mistake or a small mistake, just count it as tuition. It will help you as a leader and even as an employee to move on, to kind of like let it go and make better decisions next time.
And are there certain tools that you use actively or have in your past careers on like, hey, how do I, sometimes they're called debriefs, sometimes they're called postmortems, sometimes they're called, retrospectives. I think, not everyone, I can't tell which one of those words we're not allowed to say anymore, but like they're,
I'm sure some of them.
What do you call them? What do you call that moment where you kind of step back and you be like, hey, I don't think we should, what's the tool that you use to reflect on, hey, something that didn't go perfectly and do better next time and make that change part of your culture?
So, hey, we do retrospects. I don't like the term post-mortem because it feels morbid, right? It feels like something went so wrong that you need to have an autopsy. Like, it's hardly ever that bad, right? It's your perception. I think what we do really well is solve the problem. Like the time for retros is when the issue is resolved. So kind of like a very sound approach towards what is the issue? Let's fix it. And once it's fixed, let's realize what we've learned and move on. And the retros will include absolutely everyone that was involved just to make sure that we get all the perspectives and then take really clear action items. And I'm a storyteller, so there's a really good story very early on. So hopefully, again, like the one that makes a difference to the culture. And I barely ever tell this story because it could have been a huge failure. So this is very early days. We're pre-seed. And we have this demo for a very large customer prospect, obviously, that could make or break a young company. Now, I could not go to that demo. I sent others on my behalf. Long story short, the demo failed. And it failed for all the wrong reasons. Like, it shouldn't have failed. But there were two people there that obviously felt bad. I felt bad from where I was, and I could have said, I should have been there. And it was probably my first kind of like reflection of like, I should not have delegated this, right? It was too important to delegate. But I was like, no, I had good reasons to delegate. And to my earlier point, how do we recover? Like, how do I recover as a leader to not like beat myself up? And where do we take it? I went out for a run. I came back. I called the team together and I said, listen, the demo just failed. I'm going to recover the customer relations. I have no idea how, but I will. I'll figure out a way. You guys form a team. We're small then, right? So form a team and realize where we could have found this mistake before it led to this crucial moment. It cannot be that it's only the two people that failed to do the final test. There must have been many, 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 many times before that we could have prevented that. There were 17, by the way. The team went off and did that. But one of the things I loved about what they did, they called the two people, like most of that team was in Tel Aviv. Those two people were in California. They called them and said, hey, we'll figure it out. We'll fix it. It's not your fault. Like, don't feel so bad. Like, we've got your back. And I never asked for that, by the way. That happened, without anyone telling them that they should or whatever. But there was no finger pointing, no kind of like blame games. This was, we will fix it as a team. The other way of dealing with it would have been firing a couple of people just because I'm mad, right? Quitting myself, saying like, okay, there's no recovering this. This was too big. We're too small. There's no kind of like, and it's back to the entrepreneurial spirit, I guess, where you're like, okay, we'll figure it out. We'll find a way. Just to kind of like give the end of this, that customer became a customer. We did recover. Literally a year later, we signed a massive agreement with them. They're still a customer today. They're actually on enterprise. And somehow every time a big kind of like event happens with that account, it's almost always on the same date that we failed the demo. Which is so funny, right? But it always kind of like gets me to reflect back and say, once again, it's on the anniversary of the failure. Look how much good came out of that and how much progress has come out of that little failure.
That's fantastic. Yeah, it's definitely turning around. It sounds like there's something in the early days of the culture that really implanted that.
Yeah.
Do you find that there's other sort of like remnants from the early culture? Maybe it's a phrase, or maybe it's a process or a spreadsheet or a template or some sort of process that's sort of like, you know what, if you can go back, like a few years and say, hey, I wish we implemented this even earlier. What are some of the things you wish you put in there, whether it's a phrase or a template or just some sort of tool?
The open by default for sure. Like, I wish I had done this from pretty much day one. But tools from the early days are magic, right? Like, you're all in this together. It's like it's so tiny that everyone does everything. I honestly wish there was a way to keep that spirit. I don't have a tool for that, but and I think kind of like default open and almost extreme communication could help, but it's also very noisy. If I had it my way, or if I was to create a tool one day, I think I would find a way to keep teams, holding on to that early days mentality and spirit, to that everything's possible and we can all do everyone else's jobs without even the need for a retro. Like you're just in the doing rather than in the talking. But another thing that I would probably implement early or even now and keep is rigorously controlling how many meetings a company has. And I'm sure everyone can empathize with that. We end up with so many meetings where we never meant for that to happen. So constantly having control and really checking whether, not just for yourself, and empowering others to say, I don't need to be in that meeting. I think salespeople do this almost naturally, because they'll be like, I have a customer meeting, I just can't attend this. But I think all of us can do more of that and benefit. So I would implement a tool that says, scan my meetings and for everyone and remove half of them, just out of at the get-go.
Yeah, I think reducing meetings makes a lot of sense. And then how would you pick that half? Is it sort of random? Is it sort of like Infinity War, or is it just by random, or is there some sort of principle you have in terms of, well, what are the meetings how do you prioritize the meetings you're in? Let's say you have, you're traveling, you can only do half the meetings. How do you pick which half to do?
So again, and I think this should be a tool for teams, not just for leaders, but the question is what do I bring to the meeting? Is my presence needed? Do I have, it's like emails, the difference between to and CC. Am I kind of FYI, or am I needed to actually make something happen? And if I'm only there to kind of listen and observe, are there better ways? Because time is so valuable and you want to spend it doing the most impactful things. And again, it doesn't matter if you're the chairman, the CEO, or the product manager. We all have priorities. So just understand your impact on the meeting. And if you don't have that big of an impact, try to decline, respectfully decline, saying, I don't believe I make a difference in this meeting. I will catch up. I'll read the meeting summary. I'll listen to whatever needs to be listened to, but I'm not gonna attend this one. So, but it has to be done respectfully, because you don't want to make it sound like you disagree with whomever thought the meeting is very important and that your presence is needed.
Yeah, I think it's excellent. I think one of the tools we had back at Microsoft when I was early career is that if a developers would always get dragged in meetings, they didn't really it wasn't a great use of their time. And if their bug counts got to a certain point, they'd be put in bug jail and they couldn't go to any meetings, right? So then cool. That was a great way to and they couldn't go to meetings, they couldn't write new code, they were in bug jail until they just until they ran down their bugs. So that's maybe an extreme version.
I think what we do is we try to spare developers from even being invited to meetings. So we don't need bug jail, if you'd like. They're hardly ever. I think they only do all hands and kind of big company things if possible, or planning sessions. But I really think that's for everyone, not just for developers. Because if you're a salesperson, if you're a product manager, if you're marketing, you always have projects that you need to make an impact on. So I don't think there's one tool that works for everyone. Maybe that's the thing. I don't believe in one tool. I believe in thinking. I believe in kind of assessing situations, and I believe in conversations. So that's probably the best way. But you could have a corporate policy that says, just reduce the number of meetings by X. And I would theoretically maybe implement something like that just to see the response and see how that works. Just open by default. So.
Yeah, excellent. And it's kind of curious, maybe just on last kind of part on tools before we move on to sort of approach and sort of philosophy. When you think about tools, one of the things I'm always curious about is other CEOs' cadences, right? So how do you run your week? How do you run your month? How do you run your quarter? How do you run your year? And are there certain sort of milestones, how do you think about one-on-ones and team meetings and departmental meetings and quarterly reviews? What are the most important sort of vertebrae of your week, your month, and your quarter?
I am probably the least organized person, and I say that with respect to myself. I have defaulted to others to help me with that one, because I knew that I would never have order. I would, take a customer call over, anything else, anytime, and my schedule could go to all hell so fast if I just let that happen. What I found that worked really well for me was to kind of create those big milestones, like the yearly budget needs to happen, the annual feedback to employees needs to happen. And I look at that from pretty much an annual perspective. This is just about the right time to start looking at 2025. I only put things that must kind of like be attended in my calendar. And that could be many months in advance if necessary. And I actually write down the tasks that I need to perform in order to get there on time and be ready. And then pretty much everything else is by order of importance. Like I really do my best to, again, not attend meetings that I don't need to attend, run my task list per priority and not per, I just put something in. And maybe my biggest productivity hack, and I started doing it maybe 4 years ago, color coding your calendar. It sounds simple, but it really made a difference for me. Like you could literally see by color what's your focus for the day, what's your focus for the week, and also what your focus for like the entire year, if necessary, right? So if I was hiring an executive and my calendar did not have enough purple, which in my case is the color for kind of like interviews and hiring, then clearly my time is misaligned with my priorities. If my entire calendar is in the color of internal meetings, but the most important thing is to actually move a couple of strategic accounts along, then once again, I am misaligned between, and I can visually see that I'm misaligned. So I think that being disorganized just really helped me, because you can't ignore multiple colors means that you're defocused. The wrong color means that that maybe your priorities have shifted and you need to kind of like ask yourself whether it's something you did kind of like purposefully, or did this just happen because you don't actually control your time? And I found that to be super helpful at all levels of planning and kind of like time control, and letting an admin help you. That's another thing. Like, don't think that you can schedule for yourself, because you're probably going to make a mess out of your calendar. So.
That's awesome. I'm like totally the same. I've got color coding as well, and really rely on my admin. And totally right. It's just so like I'm so focused on customers, and then all the other stuff just kind of like, wait, like, do I need to be here? You mentioned something about writing things down in a meeting. Like, how do you like? Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So here's my approach to always being prepared, and I feel almost out of control when I can't kind of like work my own practices. So I'm almost religious about this. If I want something done, I start with when and what is the result. Like I literally put the goalpost first, and have a clear date for that to be kind of like done. And then I kind of like go backwards and map out all of the obstacles. There are holidays, there are, vacations, there's so many times we're like, oh yeah, we'll get this done in a week. But guess what? You only have 2 days, because the others are like, it's a holiday, or the key person that you need is on vacation. So I look at all of that up front. I literally write down kind of like what would be the correct dates or the correct milestones, and when can they actually happen, and what do I need? And then I guess I execute, but I literally kind of like calculate back from the point that I want something done. I think the best example would have been my fundraising process. And some say I'm very good at fundraising. I'll say I'm very good at the process. Like I'm also very passionate, and I believe in the company that I'm raising for, so that makes it easy. But it's really about understanding when you want everything done, and then understanding what needs to happen, because there's so much that goes into that. So for me, it was, I want it done before this, let's take the 2020 election. So 4 years ago, this was Series A. I realized that I wanted to do this like probably in July. So how long do I need to kind of like get my pitch ready, get my financials in order, get everything done, if I want this done by November? And by done, I mean money wired, not a term sheet, right? When do I need a term sheet? When does everything else need to happen? And it was planned to the level of where introductions were known upfront, and the time of those introductions, and when am I taking meetings, like absolutely everything was planned to crazy level of details. But it really does work when you do that, because you understand your limitations ahead of kind of like having them hit you in the face.
Yeah, 100%. That's a great way. I think that's a great way to kind of plan. It's sort of like you set the goalpost and then you work backwards and on the biggest things. And is that something you pass on to your team? Is that something that you want them to do? Or is that something that's just very natural? How do you structure it with your team, saying like, hey, I want you to do a work back plan. I want the annual plan. One of the things I try to do is I try to get annual planning done early, and it just seems to never work. It feels like everything just like doesn't become a priority.
Because you have life, right? Like you have the things that are burning right now. I definitely try. Like, I would always be the one that asks, like, what's the goal and when? And have we mapped out all the limitations? And sometimes you get those like eye rollings, right? As they're like, oh, we don't need that much planning. But again, being a strong believer, I try to just practice it myself and just show that it works. Take the fundraising as a great example, repeatedly, kind of like a successful experience. It's a teamwork, right? Like, you need other people in the team to work with you. So I took them on the journey with me, and I really do think that it transformed them in terms of being able to do it themselves. And those are later your partners in terms of, let's start the annual planning early. What are we trying to achieve, and how many kind of like hours of planning or resources we need to actually achieve it. So,
when you think about the company-wide transparency and the metrics that you share, one is open by default, so you've got all the different documents. At the same time, there's sort of like, hey, here's the metrics, here's the targets, here's what's going well, not going well, here's what we're going to do next. And how do you think about operationalizing that across your company? Some leaders it's very functional, so it's like, I will read this functional report, I will read this functional report. Some it's going to be a little bit more integrated, and you'd be like, wow, these dots are matching, and you can see that, like, well, this organization. What I find is when you push it down, this organization is trying to get this done, and they're depending on that organization. Well, that organization's got a fire it's fighting, and like, they're not going to have capacity to fix this issue. And if all the middle management can see that, rather than that flowing up to execs only, then they can sort of solve a little earlier. So it's something that I've been trying to get done in my company, which is, how do we get transparency across the functions and push that down to middle management? Just kind of curious, like, how do you think about metrics, reporting, transparency, cadence for your middle managers?
Sure. I'm not a huge believer in walls and silos and metrics in general, right? So the goal is to really have an open conversation. I think what works well for us right now is, for example, using Slack. And again, dispersed teams requires kind of like digital communication. You can't just walk to someone kind of like office and have the conversation. But we have channels that are for either customers or projects or stuff like that, where absolutely every stakeholder is there. So I will say it's noisy, and I've heard that complaint, if you'd like, from the team many, many times. But on the other hand, it really allows problems to surface early, those discrepancies that you described, of where we're both working on the same thing, or we're not going to make it because of these hurdles in our way, really do come up earlier. So I like that everyone can say everything. The Slack channel is open for everyone to kind of like immediately kind of like raise a hand and say, hey, I see a problem, and direct communication. So anyone can talk to anyone. I believe that should be the practice for as long as you can. And we're not that big that we cannot do that, right? So easier when you're 10 people, but should not be dropped even when you're 1,000 people. I think you can still probably do that without too much noise. Other than that, projects start with planning and with documents that whoever is initiating needs to think through all the stakeholders. So if I want to do something in sales that might impact operations, and in our case, let's say manufacturing, because we have a hardware device, right? I got to go through that process and actually think through who are the stakeholders, who's going to be impacted by that thing that I think I'm doing that doesn't impact anyone, right? Because so many times your default is like, oh yeah, now I'm just going to do this, no one cares, right? But you have to take a step back, right? As a process, right? You have to take a step back, and you have to initiate that document, and you have to kind of like tag absolutely everyone that's related to that. And so far, we found that to be helpful without cumbersome kind of like tools or procedures or mandatory reporting. It could be that over time, as I believe things might change, but it does work right now.
Yep, that's excellent. So maybe a couple last questions just on how do you think about sort of running your business? Like when you think about your executive team and what are the sort of shared values? Like what do you look for an executive? one of the things one of the tools I came across is you sort of need four things: someone who's done something early stage and small, someone who's done something big, someone who's had massive success, and also catastrophic failure. And if you have sort of like the big, small success and failure, then they're like not afraid of anything. They're not like, oh, I don't know what the situation is. So that was one of the tools I picked up. When you're kind of bringing in, executives or leaders, or even middle managers, are there sort of like criteria that you're looking for that's sort of for you?
I believe that companies should hire based on their values, and if someone does not meet your values, it's going to be a bad fit, no matter what other criteria that person might meet. I also like there's a book called Who,
Yes. Yeah.
which is almost like a Bible for hiring, if you ask me. Like it really does articulate that every job is different, and you really do need to understand what's important to you as a hiring manager, what's the right fit for this specific kind of like position that you're opening, rather than a wider one size fit all. I will say that personally, I'm looking for resiliency, demonstrated resiliency, right? So it could be a failure, it could also be massive success. Again, like it really doesn't matter how it kind of like comes to play. It just needs to be there. I truly appreciate doers. And hopefully that's something the company appreciates too. And it is kind of like a value as well. You have to show that you've done things, not just manage them, not just like others have done it. Like I've been through so many interviews where it's really hard to get someone to say, this is what I did and this is how I did it. So I really push hard on that. Like you need to understand what people are capable of doing, what's their comfort level, and kind of like pushing boundaries on their own capabilities. I think hiring is hard. and be transparent in what's working and what's not working post-hiring. I think that's another thing that I haven't always gotten right. Actually, I probably got it wrong more times than I got it right, but it makes me an expert by my own virtue. If something isn't working, don't kind of like believe it will change or it will get better. Have the honest conversation. Sometimes it's easier to kind of like part ways earlier. One person that I really trust once told me that it's easier to make things kind of like go away, even on your LinkedIn, if it was just a mistake on all parties involved. But it takes your courage as a leader and as a manager to say, hey, this isn't working. Maybe we made a mistake. And it's extremely hard when you're hiring senior leaders because you really, really, really want it to work. But the ability to say, no matter how I practiced my hiring and how rigorous I was about my requirements for this role, I may have made a mistake here, and I need to be honest about it and make that very painful, sometimes very expensive change. And God knows it's super hard. But I find that it's better if you actually do face it and do it early.
Yeah, 100%. There's one of my sort of talking about just kind of closing it out. Like, and I had this advisor once who just asked me a really, simple question is that like, hey, at a certain day after the hire and you don't think it's working out, has it ever turned around?
I'm saying we're so afraid of it that we sometimes prolong it. So.
Yeah, I've had, I think my middle managers are sometimes like sometimes it's been less than 30 days. They're like, no, we made a mistake and we're changing it. I have so much respect for someone who can do that. It's such a hard thing to do. And it's good. It's better for everybody. It's better for LinkedIn not getting misupdated. Maybe some of the opportunities they had before are still available. So exactly. Yeah, I think such a hard thing to do. And I think that's a great, just tool and takeaway. If you can do that, if you can, turn around quickly and realize it. Yeah, I'm very much with you.
Yeah, I've gotten better at it, so over time.
Well, thank you. This has been a fantastic conversation. We've just learned a lot of amazing tools. Would love to, so we're going to put in the show notes, Versatile, other places to keep track with you on. Are there sort of like LinkedIn or Twitter, the places where people can keep in touch and learn more about you and Versatile?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So versatile.ai would be a website, and my personal LinkedIn would just be Meirav Oren, and the company's LinkedIn is the same. It's just versatile AI. I will say one thing maybe for founders out there and CEOs. One of the things that I've noticed lately, and I've been almost fortunate to not just fundraise for my own company, but I've been given almost the honor to help a couple of amazing leaders kind of like do their rounds really like recently. So if there's someone out there that is currently going through the struggles of fundraising, I'm probably the only person you'll ever meet that says she loves fundraising. Like literally one of my favorite things to do, because I really believe that it's, and not just an incredible process, but an incredible opportunity for you to grow and for you to really know your company. And like there's so much goodness. I won't even start. But anyone out there that does not share that kind of like experience, which I believe there are many, and is actually facing it right now, feel free to come like reach out to me on LinkedIn. At a minimum, I could respond back with a little write-up that I did on this that I could share with you. And maybe if it makes sense, maybe, no promises, I'll try and find some time to have a conversation and help you see why it's an amazing process and why you should actually have fun doing it. So that's just a little gift.
That's amazing. That's so generous. Really, really appreciate it. This is so much fun. It was so great to meet you in Germany in our mutual conferences. I hope to see you again at future ones as well. But thank you so much for sharing your time and these thoughts. And I think they'll be very valuable for a lot of folks out there.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. This was a pleasure. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for listening. If you like this content, please join our LinkedIn group. Please thumbs up, please comment, please subscribe. We'd love to bring more of this content to you.